Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mysteries and Oddities video. Alright, another entry here based on one of your newer suggestions. This one having to do with a very fascinating suggestion with regards to a man who is believed to have been a real-life vampire. Various circumstances that somewhat prove this aspect, and then also the fact that this could be one of the most well documented cases of an entire town experiencing this quote unquote vampire hysteria. Lots of information that I was reading on this that couldn't quite get explained away, and then I will explain some items that people have stated at least this could be what the people were reacting to rather than, let's say, something involving vampirism. But still, a mystery to this very day, even after several hundred years, and it has to do with this guy. You're looking at a picture of him now. His name is Peter Blagojevich. I hope I'm saying that correctly, but he was someone who, again, to have believed a real-life vampire known to have apparently killed several villagers, and to this day, lots of evidence, at least stuff that was written down, still showcases that proof to this day. So very fascinating info. When I was reading this, it instantly reminded me of one of the best books I've ever read, The Interview with the Vampire. If you haven't read that, I highly recommend it. It basically tries to portray vampirism within the real world and how it would, I guess, work in today's world or even back then. So who was this Peter Blagojevich? Well, he was someone, a Serbian peasant, who lived in a village named Kisilova, which could be to this very day the modern day town of Kisiljevo, which we're looking at a picture of here. So those people that live there in that town today could have actually been in a place housing one of the world's first or a real life vampire itself. But he was someone who just lived a nonchalant life, it seemed. There was not much information with regards to what he did or what his passions were, what his job was, whatever is the case. What happened afterward, after he died, though, that's when the true story started. So he was someone that lived for a good while, but then died in 1725. Okay, not much news associated with that. But to cut to a little while later, probably about 24 hours after his death, and then that's when in that village of Kisolova, there was a sudden state of deaths, like a sudden sharp increase of deaths. In fact, within 8 days total, each about 24 hours, one after the other, there were 9 people that had been known to die. Again, not much to say to that. You could think that that's just the natural thing involving any modern town, except for this. Within each of those deaths, right on their deathbeds, each victim claimed that they were visited by Blagojevich at nighttime. Remember, this was the guy that had died almost 9 days back. He was buried, there was a ceremony, and he was dead, deader than dead. And yet each of these victims, before they died themselves, they were on a deathbed. They were telling this story to whomever would hear them before they died. They stated that there he was, this guy Peter, at night, and he was actually throttling them. And not only that, but he had a wife slash now widow who stated that on one night he visited her, asked for his shoes, and that of course got her really, really worried. And so she ended up moving to another town because obviously he should have been dead. Why is he visiting her at a nighttime, specifically to ask for some shoes, clearly, scaring the bejesus out of her because of the fact that he should have been dead. Still, though, in some other tales, it seems to be that he went to visit his son, asked for some food, and when he didn't get any food from his son, no doubt also the son being just blindsided by the fact that his father, who should be rotting away in this case in a cemetery, is instead standing right in front of him, well and alive. Because of this refusal, then he ended up killing his son, but that seems to be more of a looser part of the tale, not much other information. There's more along the lines of legends with regards to that part. Still, though, those victims, each one of them stating that they were throttled by Peter at night, they in turn caused a mass panic, one of the first real circumstances of vampire hysteria. Because if you went by the notion that it was one victim every 24 hours, then you have a town that could soon face a huge calamity because of the number of deaths thereafter. So they all started panicking. They all started saying, we must bring up the coffin, we must take a look at it, we must do something with regards to this now vampire, and they considered him to truly be a vampire, and look for some telltale signs. In that case, they wanted to see, once they brought up the coffin, that Peter A had growing hair, in other words, hair longer than what people remembered when he was buried, and that he had grown a beard, and that his nails were longer, and then most importantly, that his body itself was not in any state of decomposition. Still, though, it seemed like even with this mass hysteria, they had to get approval from a certain portion of, I guess, the church, because this had to involve a cemetery. No doubt with cemeteries having rituals, people religious portions, creating the cemeterius, the ceremonial. You can't just dig up a body, in other words. So they had to try to seek approval from a local priest, but the priest was kind of dragging his heels, not stating that he wanted to go for it, maybe because he didn't believe in the extremity of a vampire somewhere walking around that town at night. But still, though, they've demanded it at some point. With such enthusiasm that at some part it looks like the priest relented. I guess they were stating that they would abandon the village if they had to, all these villagers, and that would of course end the village outright. So the priest confirmed. He stated that he would go. They would have the body exhumed, and I guess with his permission they did so. And then here's where things get really interesting. Remember, I was mentioning earlier how there was proof showcasing that this guy, Peter Blagojevich, may have been an actual vampire. Well, when they brought up his body, there it was in its pristine glory. It was undecomposed. In other words, nothing showed the usual signs of decomposition. There was hair also growing longer than before. There was his beard now fully grown, and there were new nails on his body. Like, in other words, they had grown longer than the ones before. And most telltale as well, there was blood that was seen, fresh blood within his mouth. That was it. That was enough proof right then and there for the villagers to do something about it outright. So they took a stake, and just like any other tale involving a vampire, they drove it through his body. And when they did that, that's when there was a quote-unquote completely fresh amount of blood that flowed from the ears and the mouth of Peter Blagojevich. No mention, though, if he awakened or screamed. Nothing along the lines you normally see in vampire movies. But in that case, they completely drove the stake through the heart. And then in the other portion, part B, that's usually seen with vampires in those movies, in that case, they took his body and they completely burned it. And then that was it. There was no other instance, it seemed like, of any attacks of a quote-unquote vampire from the town. No other people that seemed to have died, at least from unnatural causes, throughout the town thereafter. In that case, though, even the priest seemed to have a little bit of regret afterward, because he was stating that these villagers were beside themselves with fear. That way the authorities, whoever came later on, I guess from the state or from the government, to try to find out what was going on with this pandemonium, who was responsible for it, that way they couldn't be blamed for it, other than the fact that they were taking measures necessary, what they deemed necessary, in order to ensure that this vampire wasn't taking hold of the community. But as far as any other instances, no other mention of this guy Peter being found any other place or known to have accompanied other towns, who knows. But these stories, these testimonies, were published in multiple parts of that region. There was a Vietnamese newspaper that printed it as well. There was another one that was somewhere in Germany, another one in France, another one in England. It seemed like this phenomenon was reported throughout multiple parts of that world. So it does seem like, yes, other people were finding out this information and then showcasing it, adding further credence to the notion that this was a real-life vampire. So as far as other information, people trying to explain what this was, maybe say, it wasn't a vampire, it was something else entirely different. Here's one theory. There was a guy back in 1725, a Michael Ranft, who attempted to state this. He stated that it could be that those villagers, the ones who died one after another, 24 hours after each other, could have died from exposure to, in this case, Peter Blagojevic's rotting corpse. So, in that case, when they were, I guess, putting him into the cemetery and turning him, that's when they were exposed to him. There was something that they could have caught. There's something that, some disease, some illness, whatever was the case, that they in turn became sick from. And in that sickness, they experienced delirium, like each one of them separately. So that's why they would in turn state on their deathbed that they were seeing things. In that case, the body or the person of Peter Blagojevich choking them, because in actuality they were in a state of delirium. It was made up, but from their perspective it seemed absolutely very, very real. That seems to be at least one explanation associated with that. Another one is the idea that some of these people that died didn't die from diseases as was reported, but they ended up dying for like a sudden death, and because their I guess families, their relatives, whoever they were, the survivors, in turn were experiencing just like a mass depression afterwards. They in turn probably ended up dying soon thereafter. You hear that notion of people dying of sadness because of one of the losses of their family members. But when that happens, their sorrow completely overtook them. Like it in turn changed their bodies. They became so depressed that they ended up having restless nights, and then they ended up having these dreams that caused them to feel like someone was tormenting them. And in that state, somehow they were able to see this guy Peter choking them or doing something to them. That's a bit of a stretch. That seems like that's like a really, really further stretch, but that still is another notion, another area that's tied to this mystery. Finally, some final things associated with this guy, this Peter Blagojevich. It seems like there has been a time period to try to identify his grave, like try to see where it was that his body was found, and maybe where his new grave was whenever it was burned outright, because it seemed like the set of villagers would have in turn buried those ashes somewhere else. But I don't think anyone was ever able to find this particular grave. So if they have the local family that has some relation to this guy, Peter Blagojevich hasn't mentioned it or is not sharing the information, or maybe outright doesn't know. But either is the case, there's somewhere out there that there could be the real life grave of this real life vampire still there within that village to this day. Just hop skipping away, just a place that someone would know that can go visit. You can take pictures, and that would be proof of where the resting place of a real life vampire was. So lots of good information to share with regards to this mysterious item. If anyone has anything else, another incident, another bit of information that's really important that I haven't shared, please post those comments below. That'd be really good to hear. So, alright everybody, thanks again as always. Take care.